Tuesday morning dawned grey over Park Avenue as Clarice Miller stepped off the crowded bus near number 2300. Her hands trembled as she clutched the strap of her worn fabric bag, where she kept a brown envelope she had carried for weeks, as if it were the most precious object in the world. At 26, Clarice had the appearance of someone who knew the meaning of the word struggle intimately. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her short nails revealed years of work as a cleaning assistant, and the cheap cotton dress she wore was clean but visibly faded from countless washes. She paused on the sidewalk for an instant, observing the hurried comings and goings of executives in their impeccable suits, of elegant women with their designer bags, all walking with the confidence of those who belong to that world. Clarice took a deep breath. She wasn't from that world, never had been, but today she needed to step into it. Today she had a purpose that went beyond her natural shyness and the fear she felt stepping into that unknown territory. The London corporate bank stood imposingly in the middle of the block, its mirrored glass facade reflecting the heavy clouds in the sky. Clarice knew that this was no ordinary bank. It was an exclusive financial institution, serving only clients with millionaire assets. Never in her life had she imagined she would one day have reason to cross those doors. But life, she had learned in recent months, held twists and turns impossible to predict. As she pushed the revolving glass door, she felt her heart quicken. The main lobby was even more intimidating than she had imagined. The Italian marble floor gleamed under the light of the crystal chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling. Everything there breathed money and power. There were only half a dozen people in the spacious area, all dressed as if they had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. The silence was almost religious, broken only by the discreet click of high heels against the marble and the low murmur of phone conversations. Clarice approached the service counter with hesitant steps. She clutched the envelope to her chest, as if that gesture could give her the courage she lacked. Behind the counter, a man of approximately 40 years old watched her. His suit was an impeccable grey, his hair perfectly gelled, and on his wrist gleamed a watch that probably cost more than Clarice earned in an entire year of work. "Good morning," she said, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "I need to resolve an inheritance matter." The manager, whose name tag identified him as Robert Adams, scrutinized her from head to toe. His gaze lingered on Clarice's simple clothes, her worn sandals, her hands marked by work. A shadow of irritation crossed his elegant face. "Inheritance," he repeated, his tone heavy with incredulity. "And do you have an account at this bank?" "No," Clarice replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But my father did. He passed away 8 months ago, and I need to arrange the transfer of assets." Robert let out a short, dry laugh that echoed through the silent lobby. Some clients turned their heads in their direction. Clarice felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Look, young lady," Robert said, leaning his elbows on the counter and bending forward with a condescending smile. "This bank serves a very specific clientele. Very select, if you catch my drift. We don't do personal loans, we don't have popular accounts, so we don't do anything of that sort. I think you must have confused us. The bank you're looking for is down the street, in the next block." Clarice felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She couldn't cry. Not there, not now. She had come prepared for resistance, but not for such direct and cruel humiliation. "I haven't confused anything, sir," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I have all the documents here. If you could just check the system." She extended the brown envelope, but Robert didn't even move to take it. Instead, he crossed his arms and sighed with exaggerated impatience. "Documents," he repeated, making a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. Every day people show up here with stories of inheritance, of rich relatives nobody knew, of forgotten money. And do you know what all these stories have in common? They're fake. They're attempts at fraud or simply cases of mental confusion." Clarice felt the blood rush to her face. "It's not a scam, sir. I have a court order, I have a DNA test, I have everything necessary." Robert rolled his eyes. "DNA," he said, pronouncing the word as if it were absurd. "And let me guess, you're the daughter of some billionaire businessman who had a secret affair with your mother, aren't you? And now, conveniently after he passed away, You show up with some fantastical story to try and snatch a fortune that isn't yours. The words were like slaps. Clarice felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Around her, other clients had stopped what they were doing and watched the scene with curiosity and judgment. She wanted to disappear, evaporate, cease to exist in that moment. But she couldn't. She had come all this way for a reason, and that reason was greater than her humiliation. "It's not like that," she whispered, her voice almost failing. "My mother never wanted anything from him. She raised me alone, working as a cleaner, cleaning 3 different houses a day. She never asked for a penny. It was only when I discovered the truth, when I found the old letters hidden in her closet, that I decided to seek my rights." Robert slammed his hand on the counter, making Clarice jump. "Mr. Henry Taylor, who was a client of this bank and who, according to you, is your father, was one of the most respected businessmen in London. Do you really think a man of that caliber would leave an heiress dressed like this, without even knowing how to use the basic services of a bank like this?" Each word was a new layer of venom. Clarice clutched the envelope so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "He didn't know I existed," she said, her voice now breaking. "My mother lost contact with him when she found out she was pregnant. She was afraid he would think it was a setup, that she was after his money, so she simply disappeared from his life and raised me alone." "What a convenient story," Robert said with sarcasm. "And you expect me to believe that I should just type a name into the system and release access to a Millionaire account for someone who just appeared out of nowhere?" "Please," Clarice pleaded, tears now streaming freely down her face. "I spent 6 months fighting in court. I sold everything I had to pay a lawyer. I did a DNA test 3 times because no one believed me. All I ask is that you check. That's all. Type the national ID number into the system, and you'll see there's a court order waiting to be fulfilled." Robert stood up from his chair, and Clarice realized he was truly irritated now. His voice rose in volume, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear clearly. "I'm not typing anything, young lady. And do you know why? Because I know a fraud when I see one. Do you think you're the first person to come here with a story like that? Do you think I'm an idiot? This bank has protocols, it has security, it has a reputation to uphold. And I'm not going to tarnish that reputation by letting just anyone walk in here with a brown envelope and a tearful story to try and steal the assets of our deceased clients." "I am not just anyone," Clarice said, now also raising her voice, a mix of desperation and anger taking over her. "I am Clarice Miller Taylor, daughter of Henry Taylor and Mary Miller, and I have a legal right to what my father left. He recognized me before he passed. It's all documented." Robert made an impatient gesture with his hand as if shooing a fly. "You're tiring me out, young lady. Either you leave peacefully now or I'll call security and you'll leave forcefully. And I can even call the police for attempted fraud and disturbing the peace. Choose." Clarice looked around, desperate. Everyone stared at her as if she were a criminal, as if she were dirty, unworthy of being there. She felt small, insignificant, as if she were a child again, and her schoolmates were mocking her for not having a father, for wearing donated clothes, for being different. It was then that Robert signaled to the security guard posted near the entrance. The man, tall and muscular in his navy blue uniform, began to walk towards them. Clarice felt panic grip her chest. It couldn't end like this, not after everything she had been through. "Sir, please," she said, her voice coming out between sobs. "I just need you to look at the documents, that's all. I'm not a scammer, I'm not crazy. I just want what is rightfully mine." The security guard reached the counter. "Young lady," he said in a firm but not hostile tone, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're causing a disturbance to the other clients." Clarice looked at the envelope in her hands. Inside was everything. The birth certificate issued after the posthumous recognition of paternity, the DNA test report, the court order determining the transfer of assets. 6 months of battle, of humiliation, of accumulated debts. And now she was being expelled like a trespasser. She opened her mouth to try one last time, but no sound came out. What was the point? No one there would believe her. To those people, she was just another poor person trying to take advantage of a situation, inventing stories to get easy money. The Security guard was already extending his hand to guide her to the exit when the revolving door began to move. A man entered the lobby with decisive steps. He wore an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, his grey hair combed back, revealing his approximately 50 years of age. He carried a leather briefcase and had the demeanor of someone accustomed to being heard and respected. He stopped a few feet from the counter, his intelligent eyes quickly assessing the situation. The security guard with his hand on the arm of a clearly distressed young woman, the manager with an irritated expression, the other clients watching as if they were witnessing an unpleasant spectacle. "What's the problem here?" the man asked, his voice calm but imbued with natural authority. Robert turned to him, his face still red with irritation. "No problem, Dr. Augustus. Just resolving an unpleasant situation. The young lady is already leaving." Augustus Fisher, for that was the newcomer's name, took a few steps forward. "It didn't look like she was leaving voluntarily. It looked to me like she was being forced to leave, and I'd like to know why." Robert hesitated. This man was clearly someone important, someone the bank could not afford to displease. "She came here with an absurd story about an inheritance, trying to gain access to funds that clearly don't belong to her. We are just following security protocols." Augustus looked at Clarice, who was still clutching the envelope to her chest, tears wetting her face. "And do you have documentation to prove your story?" he asked her directly. Clarice nodded, unable to speak. She extended the envelope with trembling hands. Augustus took it and began to examine its contents right there, standing in the middle of the lobby. Robert watched with growing discomfort, unsure how to react. The silence that followed was dense. Augustus read each document with meticulous attention, turning the pages slowly, his eyes scanning each line. Clarice could barely breathe. She didn't know who this man was, but he was her last hope. After what seemed like an eternity, Augustus raised his eyes from the documents and fixed Robert with an expression that blended disapproval and incredulity. "These documents appear perfectly legitimate. There is a clear court order here determining the release of funds. There is a DNA test certified by an accredited laboratory. There is posthumous recognition of paternity, with all necessary signatures and stamps. Why exactly is this young woman being treated like a criminal?" Robert swallowed hard. "Well, Doctor, it's just that she arrived here with a very strange story and you decided to judge her by her appearance." Augustus completed the sentence, his voice cutting. "You decided that by the simple fact that she wasn't wearing expensive clothes or speaking with the right accent, she couldn't possibly be an heiress to a client of this bank. Is that the new customer service protocol this institution has adopted?" Robert felt sweat begin to form on his forehead. Augustus Fisher's voice echoed through the lobby with an authority that could not be ignored. All the other clients now watched the scene with renewed interest, but this time the judging glances were no longer directed solely at Clarice. "Dr. Augustus," Robert began, trying to regain some composure, "you need to understand that we receive numerous attempts at fraud monthly. It is my duty to protect the bank's assets and those of our clients. I was merely being cautious." "Cautious," Augustus repeated, his tone laden with irony. "Cautious would be checking the documentation before publicly humiliating someone who has every right to be here. What you did was pure and simple prejudice, and as a corporate lawyer specializing in successions, I can assure you that this constitutes gross negligence in the performance of your duties." Clarice watched it all as if in a dream. This man was defending her, validating her story, treating her with the dignity Robert had denied her. She had no idea who he was or why he was helping her, but the gratitude she felt was almost suffocating. Augustus turned his attention back to Clarice, and his severe gaze softened considerably. "Miss, could you please tell me your deceased father's full name and his national ID number?" Clarice wiped the tears from her face with the back of her hand. "Henry Augustus Taylor," she said, her voice still trembling. And she recited the national ID numbers she had memorized after repeating them so many times in registry offices, courts, and law firms. Augustus turned to Robert. "Now, if it's not too much to ask, I'd like you to check the system and see if there's an account under that national ID number, and if there's any pending court order for execution." Robert hesitated for just a second before realizing he had no choice. With fingers that trembled slightly, he sat down at the computer and began to type. The silence in the bank was absolute. The only sound was the rapid clicking of keys and the low hum of the air conditioning. Clarice held onto the counter for support. Her legs felt about to give way. In her mind, all the steps she had taken to get there flashed by. The discovery of old love letters in her mother's closet, hidden in a dusty shoebox. The decision to seek out the man who was her biological father, only to discover he had passed away months earlier. The exhausting legal battle to prove her parentage. The nights her mother, Mary, cried softly in the next room, blaming herself for having deprived her daughter of knowing her father. The debts they had incurred with lawyers, years of savings evaporated in legal fees. Robert's face gradually changed as he read what appeared on the screen. Irritation and arrogance gave way first to surprise, then to genuine shock, and finally to what seemed like fear. "So, Robert," Augustus said calmly, breaking the tense silence, "did you find anything?" Robert opened and closed his mouth a few times before he could speak. He began, his voice hoarse. "There is an account, yes, a premium business account in the name of Henry Augustus Taylor, inactive status since the account holder's passing 8 months ago. And there is a court order registered 3 weeks ago determining the transfer of 70% of the funds to Clarice Miller Taylor upon presentation of complete documentation and proof of identity." "And what is the balance of that account?" Augustus asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to force Robert to admit it aloud. Robert swallowed hard. £4,783,000, plus investments in funds totaling approximately another £2 million. A murmur ran through the lobby. Clarice felt her legs finally give way, and she gripped the counter with both hands. Nearly £7 million. Her mind couldn't process that number. It was more money than she could earn in 10 lifetimes working as a cleaning assistant. Augustus crossed his arms and fixed Robert with a stern expression. "So tell me, Robert Adams, according to your name tag, how exactly do you justify attempting to expel a legitimate heiress with complete legal documentation from an account with nearly £7 million, basing your decision exclusively on the fact that she was wearing simple clothes?" Robert opened his mouth, but no convincing excuse came out. I made an error in judgment. I didn't know that—" "Didn't know what?" Augustus interrupted him, his voice now loud enough to echo across the marble. "Didn't know that poor people can be legitimate heirs? Didn't know that your job is to verify documentation and not make assumptions based on appearance? Didn't know that discrimination is a crime and that publicly shaming someone can lead to a lawsuit for moral damages?" Clarice watched it all, still in shock. Part of her wanted to scream with joy, to embrace this unknown man who had appeared like an avenging angel. Another part was still paralyzed by the magnitude of what was happening. Her life, which had changed drastically when she discovered her father's identity, was about to change again, even more radically. "Dr. Augustus," Robert tried again, panic now evident in his voice, "I apologize, sincerely. Miss Clarice, I deeply regret the misunderstanding. If you can forgive me, we can resolve everything right now quickly and professionally." "Misunderstanding," Clarice heard her own voice say, surprised by the firmness she managed to infuse into the words. "You called me a scammer. You accused me of trying to steal. You threatened to hand me over to the police. You made a point of humiliating me in front of everyone. And now that you've discovered I was telling the truth, you want to call it a misunderstanding." Robert paled. "Miss, I was just doing my job, trying to protect the bank." "Your job," Augustus intervened, "is to verify documentation and follow protocols. It is not to judge people by the clothes they wear or the social class they belong to. And I'm sure regional management will be very interested to know how their employees treat legitimate clients." Upon hearing the mention of regional management, Robert grew even paler. "Please, Doctor," he said, his voice now pleading, "there's no need to involve regional management. I'll resolve this now. I'll give Miss Clarice all the necessary support. I'll ensure everything is processed with the utmost priority." "Too late for that," a female voice said from behind them. Everyone turned. A woman of approximately 50 years walked through the lobby from the administrative area. She wore a burgundy executive suit, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and her brown eyes radiated a mixture of authority and irritation. Her name tag identified her as Beatrice Nolan, regional manager. "I was in the meeting room," she said, stopping beside Augustus and looking directly at Robert. "The walls are glass, as you well know. I saw and heard everything that happened here in the last 15 minutes, and I'm absolutely disgusted." Robert seemed to shrink. "Ms. Nolan, I can explain." "Explain what, Robert?" she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "Can you explain why you treated a legitimate client as if she were a criminal? Can you explain why you didn't follow basic document verification protocol before making serious accusations? Can you explain why you thought it appropriate to expose this young woman to public humiliation?" Beatrice turned to Clarice, and her stern expression softened. "Miss Clarice, on behalf of the Corporate Bank of London, I extend my most sincere and profound apologies for the absolutely unacceptable treatment you received today. Mr. Alden's behavior does not reflect the values of this institution and will be dealt with utmost severity." Clarice merely nodded, still unable to fully process everything that was happening. The last few hours had been an emotional roller coaster that had left her exhausted. Augustus spoke up again. "Ms. Nolan, as Ms. Clarice's lawyer, I would like to formally request that the security camera footage be preserved. It will be necessary for the moral damages lawsuit that will be filed against the bank and against Mr. Alden personally." "Moral damages lawsuit?" Robert repeated, panic now complete on his face. Beatrice nodded to Augustus. "The footage will be preserved immediately, and as for Mr. Alden, he is suspended from his duties as of this moment. Robert, you will withdraw to the Human Resources room and wait there. The legal department will contact you regarding the appropriate measures." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but a look from Beatrice silenced him. He rose from his chair with stiff movements, avoiding Clarice's gaze, and walked towards the back of the bank with the posture of a defeated man. "Miss Clarice," Beatrice said, turning her attention back to the young woman, "would you accompany me to my office? I will personally handle all the fund release and asset transfer, and Dr. Augustus, of course, is invited to join us." Clarice looked at Augustus, uncertain. He gave her a reassuring smile and a slight nod. "You can go ahead," he said gently. "I'll be by your side every step of the way." They followed Beatrice through the lobby, past customers who now watched them with a mixture of curiosity and embarrassment. Clarice kept her eyes fixed forward, trying to ignore the stares. They entered a corridor lined with noble wood that led to the administrative area. Beatrice's office was at the end of the corridor, a spacious room with a view of Regent Street through enormous glass windows. "Please have a seat," Beatrice said, indicating 2 comfortable armchairs opposite her desk. "May I offer you coffee, water, anything else?" "Water, please," Clarice managed to say, her throat dry from crying. Beatrice poured fresh water into crystal glasses and then sat behind her desk. "Before we begin the formal procedures," she said, looking directly at Clarice, "I would like to say something personally. What happened today is inexcusable. No person should be treated the way you were treated, regardless of your financial situation or appearance. This bank has existed for 40 years and has always prided itself on its excellence in service. Mr. Alden violated not only our protocols, but also basic principles of human dignity." She paused, picking up a pen from her desk and twirling it between her fingers. "I'm going to be honest with you. Cases like this infuriate me, because they reveal something we'd rather not admit, which is the systemic prejudice that still exists in institutions like ours. Employees like Robert are trained to identify fraud, but sometimes that training turns into prejudice disguised as caution." Augustus leaned forward. "Ms. Nolan, I appreciate your honesty, but honesty is not enough to repair the damage caused. Ms. Clarice was exposed to public humiliation, was accused of a crime, was treated as if she were unworthy of being in this space. This has deep emotional consequences." Beatrice nodded. "I fully agree. That is why, in addition to processing the immediate transfer of funds according to the court order, the bank is prepared to offer significant compensation for moral damages." We are talking about a substantial amount, which will be negotiated directly with the legal department, but I can tell you in advance that it will not be less than £500,000. Clarice choked on the water she was drinking. £500,000, she repeated, incredulous. It's the minimum we consider fair given the circumstances, Beatrice said. Additionally, you will have a premium manager dedicated exclusively to your needs, all bank products and services at your disposal without fees for the next 5 years, and free financial consulting to help you manage your inheritance in the best possible way. Augustus watched everything with satisfaction, but Clarice perceived there was something more in his gaze, something she couldn't decipher. A familiarity, perhaps, or a knowledge that went beyond that specific situation. Ms. Nolan, Augustus said, before we proceed with the bureaucratic formalities, I would like to have a moment alone with my client. It's just a few minutes. Matters related to the deceased that need to be handled privately. Beatrice looked from one to the other and then nodded. Of course, you may use the adjacent meeting room. I will arrange all the necessary documentation in the meantime. Ms. Clarice, when you return, we will have everything ready for your signature. Augustus stood up and gestured for Clarice to follow him. They left Beatrice's office and entered the adjacent meeting room, a smaller but equally elegant space, with an oval mahogany table and upholstered chairs. Augustus closed the door behind them, and for the first time since he had appeared, seemed hesitant. Clarice, he began, and there was a softness in his voice that hadn't been there before. There's something I need to tell you, something that goes beyond this situation at the bank. Clarice sat in one of the chairs, suddenly feeling a deep weariness. Who are you? She asked directly. Why are you helping me? How did you know about my father? Augustus pulled a chair and sat beside her, not across the table. He took a deep breath before he started speaking. My name is Augustus Farrell, as you already know, but what you don't know is that I'm not just a lawyer who happened to show up here by chance. The silence in the meeting room was dense, charged with anticipation. Clarice watched Augustus with wide eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in his expression, a mixture of contained emotion and determination, that made her both anxious and curious. I knew your father, Augustus finally said, the words coming out slowly, as if each one carried a specific weight. I knew Henry over 30 years ago. We were college classmates at King's College London. We graduated together in law, but more than colleagues, we were friends. Best friends. Clarice felt something tighten in her chest. Throughout her life, her father had been an abstract figure, a name in old letters, a shadow without substance. And now, here was someone who had truly known him, who could give her details, stories, pieces of a person she never had the chance to meet. You knew my father? She repeated, her voice a whisper. So, you knew about me? Augustus shook his head slowly. Not always. Let me explain. Henry told me about Mary, your mother, many times. He fell in love with her when he was 25. She worked as a secretary in one of the offices where he was interning. Henry came from a wealthy, traditional family with very specific expectations about who he should marry. But he fell madly in love with Mary. He paused, his eyes distant, as if seeing scenes from the past. They dated in secret for almost 2 years. Henry knew his family would never accept the relationship, not because Mary wasn't a wonderful person, but because she didn't come from their same social world. It was a battle he wasn't ready to face at that point in his life. Clarice clasped her hands in her lap. She felt anger and sadness at the same time. Anger at the family who judged her mother without knowing her. Sadness for the love that had been prevented from blossoming. One day, Augustus continued, Mary simply disappeared. She stopped going to work, moved addresses, changed her phone number. Henry was desperate. He asked me for help to find her, but it was impossible. It was as if she had evaporated. He spent months searching, but eventually his family pressured him to move on. A year later, under pressure from his parents, he married Marianne Cross, a woman from a traditional family his mother had chosen. And he never knew my mother was pregnant, Clarice said. It wasn't a question, it was a realization. No, Augustus confirmed. Mary never told him. I imagine she thought it would be a burden, an obligation, or perhaps she was afraid he would think it was a trap to get his money. Whatever the reason, she made the decision to raise you alone, and Henry never knew he had a daughter. Clarice felt the tears return, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of loss, of mourning, for something that never had the chance to exist. "My mother," she said with a choked voice, "always spoke so highly of him. Even when things were difficult, when we both worked 2 shifts to pay the rent, she never said a bad word about him. She said he was a good man who was trapped in a world he didn't choose." "That was exactly it," Augustus said softly. "Henry was brilliant, successful, wealthy, but he was also deeply unhappy. His marriage to Marianne was a facade. They had no children, not because they didn't want to, but because there simply was no love there. It was a union of convenience, of surnames and fortunes, not of heart." He stopped again, as if deciding how much more he should reveal. Then, 2 years ago, Henry discovered he was ill. Aggressive cancer, advanced stage. The doctors gave him perhaps a year to live at most. It was a brutal shock. He was only 52, years old at the peak of his career, and suddenly found himself confronted with his own mortality. Clarice wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "And that's when he decided to look for my mother?" Augustus nodded. "He came to me and told me he had one thing he needed to do before he passed. He needed to find Mary. He needed to know what had happened, why she had disappeared. I hired private investigators. It took 4 months, but we finally found her." "4 months," Clarice repeated. "How long ago was that?" "About 1.5 years ago," Augustus replied. "The investigators discovered that Mary lived in a simple house in the East End of London, working as a cleaner, and that she had a 25-year-old daughter. You." Clarice felt the ground move beneath her. 1.5 years. Her father had discovered her existence 1.5 years ago, and she had only discovered his identity 8 months ago when she found the letters in her mother's closet. "When Henry received that information," Augustus continued, "he collapsed, literally. He spent 3 days locked in his office, refusing to speak to anyone except me. He had a daughter he never knew, who grew up without a father, who suffered hardships while he lived in mansions and drove imported cars. The guilt he felt was devastating." "But he didn't come looking for us," Clarice said, and there was a sting of hurt in her voice. "If he knew where we were, why didn't he come?" Augustus sighed deeply. "Because he was afraid. Afraid that you and your mother would reject him. Afraid of causing more pain than he had already caused with his absence. And also because he wanted to do things the right way. He came to me to start the entire legal process of paternity recognition, to ensure that you would be his legitimate heir, that you would be entitled to everything he had built." He paused, his voice becoming more emotional. "Henry used to say that he couldn't change the past. He couldn't recover the 25 years he had lost, but he could ensure that your future was secure. He sold assets, reorganized investments, set up a solid financial structure, all for you." Clarice was sobbing now, her shoulders trembling. That man she never knew, that father who was just a name in old letters, had thought of her, had worried about her, had tried to correct his failures even when time was running out. "He planned to come personally," Augustus said, his own voice now choked. "He had everything prepared. He was going to show up at your house one Saturday morning with flowers and a letter explaining everything. But the illness progressed faster than the doctors predicted. In the last few months he could barely get out of bed." Clarice looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Did he suffer much?" Augustus hesitated before answering. "He suffered, yes. Physically, the disease was brutal, but the emotional suffering was even worse. He passed knowing he had a daughter he never hugged, never heard her voice, never saw her smile. In his last days, he only talked about you. He asked what you were like, if you looked like him, if you had inherited any of his traits. Why didn't you look for us sooner?" Clarice asked, her voice now firmer despite the tears. "If you knew about me, if you were taking care of everything, why did you wait until today?" "Because he asked me to," Augustus replied simply. Henry made one last request before he passed. He made me promise that I would let you forge your own path, that I would not interfere in the legal process you would have to face to prove your parentage. He believed you needed to do it on your own, to prove your strength, your determination. He didn't want you to think you were getting things just because he had made it easy. Clarice shook her head, incredulous. But I went through 6 months of hell. I sold everything I had, got into debt, faced his family's lawyers who tried to prove I was an imposter. Why did he think I needed to go through that? Because he knew you, Augustus said, surprising Clarice. He had investigators who brought him monthly reports about you. It wasn't an invasion of privacy in a bad way. It was a father trying to get to know his daughter from afar. He knew you were strong, hard-working, principled. He knew you had graduated in accounting by studying at night while working during the day. He knew you cared for your mother with devotion. And he believed you deserved the chance to prove to the world and to yourself that you were capable of fighting for your rights. It was a tortuous logic, Clarice thought, but somehow it made sense. Her father, even sick and distant, had tried to give her something more valuable than money. He had tried to give her self-confidence, the certainty that she could win difficult battles. But I wouldn't let you go through humiliation, Augustus continued, his voice growing firmer. Henry asked me not to interfere in the legal process, and I respected that. But he also made me promise that when everything was resolved, when you finally came to claim your inheritance, I would be there to ensure that no one treated you badly. He made me promise that I would protect you. That's why you showed up at the bank today, Clarice said, understanding finally dawning in her eyes. Augustus nodded. I was monitoring your legal process. I knew the fund release order had been issued 3 weeks ago. I calculated that you would soon come to the bank. So, for the past few days, I've been coming here every morning, waiting. When I saw you walk in today, I recognized you immediately from the photos Henry showed me. And when I realized how that imbecile was treating you, I couldn't stay quiet. Clarice felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost suffocated her. But along with the gratitude, there also came an overwhelming sense of loss. Loss for the father she never knew, for the relationship they never had, for the years that had been stolen from both of them. Did he leave anything for me, she asked, besides the money? Any letter? Any message? Augustus smiled for the first time, and it was a gentle, paternal smile. Yes, he did, but not here. It's in his private, safe deposit box in the basement of this bank. I have the key and authorization to take you there. But first, we need to sort out all the paperwork with Ms. Nolan, ensure the money is transferred correctly, that everything is done according to legal procedures. Clarice nodded, wiping her face once more. She was emotionally exhausted, but she also felt a kind of peace beginning to settle in her heart. It wasn't the happy ending she would have chosen. She didn't have her father alive to hug and get to know, but she had something. She had stories. She had a friend of his who could tell her more. She had the certainty that she had been loved even from a distance. There's one more thing, Augustus said, becoming serious again. Henry's family, his widow, Marianne, and his parents, they didn't take the paternity recognition well. They tried to contest it, hired the best lawyers to prove it was fraud. It was an ugly battle. I know, Clarice said bitterly. Their lawyers made me repeat the DNA test 3 times. They subjected me to cruel interrogations, tried to destroy my mother's reputation, insinuated she was an adventurer who had set everything up. Augustus pressed his lips into a thin line. I wanted to intervene at that moment, but I had promised Henry I wouldn't. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, watching you suffer from afar without being able to help directly. And now? Clarice asked, concern tinging her voice. Will they try to reverse the court decision? Will they continue to harass me? They can't, Augustus said with conviction. The judgment is final. There are no more possible appeals, and besides, Henry documented everything very well. There are videos he recorded explaining his will, there. Our letters. There is all kinds of evidence that the recognition was legitimate and desired. They may not like it, but they will have to accept it. Augustus and Clarice remained silent for a few moments, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Augustus stood up and extended his hand to Clarice. Come on, he said gently. Ms. Nolan must be waiting for us. The faster we resolve the bureaucratic part, the faster we can go to the safe deposit box." Clarice took his hand and stood up. She felt strangely light despite the emotional weight of the conversation she had just had. It was as if a knot she hadn't even known existed in her chest had finally come undone. They returned to Beatrice's office, where she awaited them with a pile of organized documents on the table. "Miss Clarice," Beatrice said as they entered, "I have everything ready here. There are many papers to sign, but I will explain each one calmly. There is no rush. We can take all the time necessary." Over the next 2 hours, Clarice signed document after document. Transfer authorizations, inheritance acceptance terms, tax forms, new account registrations, powers of attorney for Augustus to act as her solicitor and financial consultant. Beatrice patiently explained each item, ensuring Clarice understood exactly what she was signing. Throughout the entire process, Beatrice maintained a respectful and considerate tone that contrasted drastically with the treatment Clarice had received from Robert. The regional manager also formally introduced the premium manager, who would be dedicated to Clarice, a man named Ferdinand Rivers, about 35 years old, who proved to be helpful and professional. "Miss Clarice," Ferdinand said when he was introduced, "it will be an honor to work with you. I am at your disposal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any need you have, you can call me directly on this number." He handed her a business card with embossed gold lettering. "In addition to the fund transfer," Beatrice continued, "we are also arranging the transfer of your investments in various funds. Mr. Augustus and Ferdinand will work together to ensure your assets are managed in the best possible way, maximizing your returns while maintaining capital security." Clarice simply nodded. The magnitude of the numbers was difficult to process. Nearly £7 million. It was more money than she had earned in her entire life. More money than she could spend even living comfortably for decades. Her mother would never again need to clean strangers' homes. She herself would never again need to wake up at 5 in the morning to catch 3 buses to work. "There's also the matter of compensation for the moral damages suffered today," Beatrice said, her voice becoming more serious. "As I mentioned earlier, the bank is offering £500,000, but if Mr. Augustus considers that amount insufficient, we are open to negotiation." Augustus leaned forward. "The amount is fair as a starting point," he said, "but I would like to add a few conditions. First, that Mr. Robert Alvarez be formally dismissed, not just suspended. Second, that the bank implement a mandatory training program on prejudice and discrimination for all employees. Third, that an internal audit be conducted to verify if other clients have been treated similarly in the past." Beatrice did not hesitate. "I agree with all conditions. Mr. Alvarez will be dismissed for gross misconduct today. The training program will be implemented within 30 days, and the audit will begin next week. We will have external consultants to ensure impartiality." Augustus looked at Clarice. "What do you think? Do you agree with these terms?" Clarice thought for a moment. Part of her wanted to make Robert suffer more, wanted to sue him individually, wanted to see him ruined. But another part, the part her mother had raised with values of forgiveness and compassion, recognized that revenge would not bring peace. "I agree," she finally said, "but I want him to know why he's being dismissed. I want him to understand that it wasn't just for making a mistake, but because he chose to judge someone based on appearance, because he chose cruelty instead of humanity." Beatrice nodded in approval. "I will personally make sure to inform him, and you have every right to be present for that conversation if you wish." Clarice shook her head. "No, I don't need to see him again. I just need to know that he understood the lesson." With all the documents signed and all terms agreed upon, Beatrice stood up and extended her hand to Clarice. "It has been an honor to meet you, Miss Clarice, even under the regrettable circumstances that brought you here today. I hope that from now on your experience with our bank will be completely different." Clarice shook her hand. "Thank you for resolving the situation," she said sincerely, "and for taking what happened seriously." After bidding farewell to Beatrice and Ferdinand, Augustus led Clarice back to the main lobby. The movement had increased. It was almost noon and the bank was fuller. But this time, as they crossed the marble space, Clarice walked differently, not with arrogance, but with dignity. She knew who she was. She knew she had as much right to be there as anyone else. They took the elevator down to the basement, where the private vaults were located. It was a maximum security area, with armored doors and armed guards. Augustus showed his credentials and the legal authorization to access Henry Travers's vault. After several verification procedures, including fingerprint scanning and facial recognition, they were finally led to a small private room. In the center of the room was a simple table and 2 chairs. Augustus placed his briefcase on the table and removed an old golden key with ornate details from it. "This key," he said, "opens your father's private vault. He personally handed it to me 2 weeks before he passed, saying that when the right moment came, I would know what to do." He used the key to open a compartment in the wall. From inside, he removed a polished mahogany box, not very large, perhaps the size of a shoebox. He placed it on the table with reverent care. "I'll leave you alone to open it," Augustus said softly. "These are private moments between father and daughter, even if he's no longer here. I'll be outside when you're ready." Clarice looked at the box with a pounding heart. "Wait," she said, as Augustus turned to leave. You can stay, please. I don't want to be alone. Please." Right now." Augustus returned and sat beside her, not facing her. With trembling hands, Clarice opened the box. The interior was lined with dark red velvet. There were several items carefully arranged. The first item that caught her attention was a necklace. It was white gold, delicate but clearly antique, with a tear-shaped pendant encrusted with small diamonds. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It belonged to your paternal grandmother," Augustus explained. "Henry told me it was the most precious piece of jewelry in the family, inherited from generation to generation. He wanted you to have it, to know that you are part of that lineage, regardless of what the family might have said or done." Clarice picked up the necklace delicately, feeling its weight in her hands. She had never owned anything so valuable. Beneath the necklace was a thick, cream-colored paper envelope, with her name handwritten in elegant but shaky script, "Clarice Meadows Travers, my daughter." She picked up the envelope, but her hands trembled so much she could barely open it. Augustus gently took the envelope from her, carefully opened it, and returned the pages to her hands. They were 3 sheets of paper, covered with the same shaky handwriting, clearly written by someone very ill. Clarice began to read, and tears immediately started to fall, blurring some of the words. "My dearest Clarice," the letter began, "I write these words knowing that I will never have the chance to say them to you personally, and that is the greatest sorrow of my life. I am your father, Henry, and although I never knew you, I love you with an intensity that surprises and devastates me in equal measure. I discovered your existence too late. When the investigators brought me the news that Mary, the love of my youth, had given birth to a daughter, my daughter, I felt such great joy that my ailing heart almost couldn't bear it. But along with the joy came overwhelming guilt. 25 years. 25 years in which you grew up without a father, in which you struggled, suffered, needed, while I lived a life of privilege I didn't deserve." Clarice had to stop reading for a moment, sobbing. Augustus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering silent comfort. "I want you to know," the letter continued, "that your mother was the great love of my life. I was a coward when I let my family keep me away from her. I was a coward when I chose social approval instead of true love. That cowardice cost me a lifetime of happiness, and it cost you and Mary much more. There are not enough words to express my regret. The investigators told me about you, about how hard-working, upright, strong you are, about how you cared for your mother when she fell ill, working 3 jobs to pay for her treatment, about how you returned to study at night, determined to get a better education. Every detail I learned filled me with pride and pain. Pride because you are everything I would want a daughter to be. Pain because I wasn't there to support you, to guide you, to simply hug you and tell you I love you. The money I am leaving you is just money. It cannot buy back lost years. It cannot replace my presence. But I hope it can give you security, that it can allow you and your mother to live with dignity, that you can fulfill dreams you might have abandoned out of necessity. I asked Augustus not to interfere in your legal proceedings because I believed you needed to prove to the world, and especially to yourself, that you are strong enough to fight for your rights. But I also asked him to be there when you claimed your inheritance, to ensure no one treated you with disrespect. Augustus is my brother at heart. Trust him as I trust him. He will guide you, protect you in the way that I could not. The necklace in this box belonged to my mother, your grandmother Eleanor. She was a strong and kind woman who would have loved you deeply. I want you to wear it and wear it. Remember that you carry within you the strength of women who came before. You are not just the daughter of a courageous cleaner, you are also a descendant of a lineage of women who faced adversity and prevailed. There are also in this box some photos of me at different stages of my life. We don't have memories together, but I hope these images can give you some sense of who I was. I hope you can look at them and see something of yourself reflected. My dearest daughter, I know I asked a lot by letting you fight for your inheritance alone, but I believed you needed that victory. You needed to prove that you belong in any space you choose to occupy, not because you are my daughter, but because you are Clarice. Strong, determined, worthy. Forgive me for not having been the father you deserved. Forgive me for all the birthdays I missed, for all the times you needed a father's hug and he wasn't there. Forgive me for letting fear and cowardice keep me away from the greatest gift life could have given me. Live well, my daughter. Love deeply, always be kind, but never let anyone make you feel small. You are the daughter of Mary Meadows, the bravest woman I ever knew, and you are the daughter of Henry Travers, an imperfect man who loved you the only way he knew how. With all my love and all my regret, your father, Henry. Clarice finished reading and simply stood there, holding the pages, crying silently. Augustus said nothing, just remained by her side, allowing her to process everything in her own time. After long minutes, Clarice carefully placed the letter back in the envelope and looked inside the box again. There was a small photo album. She opened it and saw her father for the first time. Photos of him young, smiling, full of life. Photos of him older, more serious, his eyes revealing an invisible burden. In the last photo, he was visibly ill, thin, pale, but there was something gentle in his expression, as if he had finally found peace. He was handsome, Clarice said, tracing his face in the photo with her finger. I have his eyes. Yes, Augustus confirmed, his voice hoarse with emotion. And his smile too. Henry used to say he had a crooked smile, and you have exactly the same one. Clarice closed the album and picked up the necklace again. With still trembling fingers, she placed it around her neck. The metal was cold against her skin, but somehow it made her feel connected, anchored. I'll wear it every day, she said, to remember him, to remember where I came from. Augustus smiled. He would be happy to know that. They remained in the vault room for a few more minutes, in respectful silence, as if keeping vigil. Finally, Clarice carefully put all the items back into the box, now her box, her emotional inheritance beyond the financial. When Clarice and Augustus finally left the bank, it was already mid-afternoon. The sky remained cloudy, but to Clarice it seemed as though the entire world was brighter. She clutched the mahogany box against her chest, protecting her most precious treasure, while in her purse she carried documents that completely changed the course of her life. Let me take you home, Augustus offered, indicating a luxurious black car parked in front of the bank. His private chauffeur was at the wheel. Clarice hesitated. I live quite far from here, she said. In Hopewell Estate, in the East End. You don't need to trouble yourself. It's no trouble, Augustus insisted gently, and besides, I would like to meet Mary. If she permits, of course. After all, she was the great love of my best friend, and I am curious to finally meet the woman who so deeply impacted Henry's life. Clarice felt a pang in her heart thinking of her mother. Mary still knew nothing of what had happened that day. She thought her daughter had simply gone to the bank to sort out the inheritance transfer, without imagining the drama and intense emotions Clarice had experienced. All right, Clarice agreed. But I need to warn her first. She's not well, she has a heart condition, and I don't want her to have a shock. During the journey to the East End, which took almost an hour in London's heavy traffic, Clarice called her mother. Mum, she said when Mary answered, a lot has happened today. I'm fine. Everything is resolved, but I need you to sit down when I arrive because I have a lot to tell you." "Daughter, you're scaring me," Mary said from the other end of the line, her weak voice revealing her debilitated condition. "What happened? Was there a problem at the bank?" "Nothing that hasn't been resolved," Clarice assured her. "But I'm bringing someone with me. A solicitor who," she hesitated, "who knew my father. He has many things to tell us." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Mary said, her voice even weaker, "All right, daughter. I'll be waiting." In the car, Augustus watched the landscape gradually change. The glass and steel skyscrapers of Oxford Street gave way to more modest buildings, then to simple houses, narrow streets, local shops. The Hopewell estate was a working-class neighborhood, where honest workers struggled day after day to support their families with dignity. "It's there," Clarice indicated a narrow street, "the yellow house with the green gate." The chauffeur stopped the car in front. It was a small but well-kept house, with a little garden in front where some flowers grew in makeshift pots. The iron gate was a little rusty, but recently painted, and the walls, though faded, were clean. Clarice got out of the car, holding the box carefully. Augustus followed her, and she couldn't help but notice the contrast between him, with his expensive suit and refined posture and that humble environment, but he showed no discomfort or judgment, only respectful interest. When Clarice opened the door, she found her mother sitting on the worn sofa in the small living room. Mary Meadows was 52 but looked older. Years of heavy labor had slightly stooped her back, and the recent heart condition had further thinned her already small body. But her eyes, the same dark brown shade as Clarice's, still shone with intelligence and sweetness. "Mum," Clarice said, sitting beside her and taking her hands, "this is Mr. Augustus Ferreira. He was Henry's best friend." Mary looked at Augustus with a complex expression, a mix of curiosity, nervousness, and perhaps a touch of sadness. "Hello, Mr. Ferreira," she said politely. "Please, have a seat. Excuse the simple house." "Your home is welcoming, Mrs. Meadows," Augustus said sincerely, sitting in the only available armchair. "And it's an honor to finally meet you. Henry spoke so much about you in the last months of his life that I feel like I already know you." Mary squeezed Clarice's hand, seeking strength. She began, her voice faltering. "He remembered me then? After so many years?" "He never forgot you," Augustus said gently. "You were the great love of his life, Mrs. Meadows. The marriage he had was merely a social formality. It was you he carried in his heart all these years." Tears began to roll down Mary's face. "Why didn't he look for me? When he knew about his illness, why didn't he come?" Augustus leaned forward. He wanted to. He planned 1,000 times how he would. But he was afraid. Afraid you would reject him after so many years of abandonment. Afraid of causing more pain. And also, he hesitated, he wanted to set things right first. He wanted to ensure Clarice was legally recognized, that she had all the rights as an heiress. "I never wanted anything from him," Mary said, almost defensively. "I raised my daughter alone and with pride. I never asked for a penny." "I know," Augustus said, "and Henry knew it too. That's exactly why he loved you so much. Because you were genuine, not self-serving. Because you chose to leave instead of trapping him with a pregnancy he might interpret as a setup." Clarice, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Mum, there's something I need to show you." She opened the mahogany box and carefully removed the letter. "He wrote this, for me, but I think you need to read it too." With trembling hands, Mary took the pages and began to read. Clarice and Augustus remained silent, watching emotions cross the face of that woman who had carried so much weight alone for so many years. When Mary reached the part where Henry spoke about her, about how he had been a coward, about how she was the great love of his life, she broke down in deep sobs. Clarice hugged her, letting her cry. They were tears, of pain, yes, for the life that could have been and wasn't. But they were also tears of validation, of knowing that the love she had felt wasn't one-sided, that he too had suffered, that she had meant something to him. When Mary finally calmed down, she looked at the necklace Clarice was wearing. "It's beautiful," she said in a hoarse voice. Was it his mother's? Clarice's grandmother's, Augustus confirmed. Henry wanted her to know that she is part of the family, that she has a lineage not only from your side, Mrs. Meadows, but from his side as well. Mary nodded slowly, then looked at Clarice. And the money? Were you able to sort everything out at the bank? It was complicated, Clarice said, anger returning a little as she remembered Robert. A manager treated me very badly. He accused me of being a swindler, wanted to throw me out of the bank. It was horrible, Mum, but Dr. Augustus appeared and sorted everything out. She then told the whole story, from the initial humiliation to Augustus's intervention, the discovery of the millionaire balance, Robert's dismissal, the compensation offered by the bank. Mary listened, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Almost £7 million, Mary repeated when Clarice finished. "My God, daughter, that's so much money. What are we going to do with so much money?" Clarice smiled through her tears. "First, you're going to stop working immediately. You'll get your heart treatment with the best doctors in a private hospital without queues, without waiting. We're going to move from here to a better house, or maybe an apartment in a quieter place. And you're going to rest, Mum. You'll finally be able to rest." Mary shook her head, more tears falling. "I don't need a big house, daughter. This one has always been enough. But now we can have more," Clarice insisted. "Not because this house isn't good, but because we deserve it. You've worked your whole life, Mum. You cleaned other people's houses while ours went without your care, because you were always exhausted. You deserve to have a beautiful, comfortable place where you can finally live, instead of just surviving." Augustus watched the exchange between mother and daughter with a gentle smile. "Henry was right about you two," he said. "He said that Mrs. Mary had raised an extraordinary daughter, and now I see he was completely right. Mrs. Mary," he continued, becoming more serious, "I need to talk to you about some practical matters. Clarice is young, and although she is intelligent and educated, she has never dealt with such large sums of money. With your permission, I would like to act as her financial consultant, helping her make wise decisions about investments, expenses, and future planning." Mary looked at Clarice, who nodded. "I trust him, Mum," Clarice said. "He was my father's best friend, and today he proved that he's on our side." "Then it's decided," Mary said. "Dr. Augustus, thank you for looking after my daughter today, and for bringing news about Henry. As painful as it is, it's comforting to know he didn't forget us." Augustus stayed with them for another hour, explaining in simple terms how investments would work, how much monthly income they could expect, and how the money could be managed to last for generations. He talked about the importance of not making drastic immediate changes, of taking time to adjust to the new financial reality, and of seeking advice before big decisions. "There's also the matter of the Thompson family," he said eventually, his tone becoming more cautious. "His widow, Marianne, and his parents, they were not, how shall I say, receptive to Clarice's paternity recognition. They tried to prevent it," Clarice said bitterly. "They hired expensive lawyers to prove I was an impostor." "They will try to get in touch," Augustus warned. "Now that the money has been transferred, they might try other approaches. They might offer settlements for Clarice to publicly renounce the inheritance. They might even try a more, shall we say, personal approach." "What are you saying?" Mary asked, concern evident in her voice. "Is that my daughter is in danger?" "Not in physical danger," Augustus quickly clarified, "but in danger of being manipulated, pressured, or publicly exposed. The Thompson family is powerful and well-connected. They might try to use the media. They might try to harm Clarice's reputation. They might do many things." "So what do we do?" Clarice asked, feeling fear clench her stomach. "First, do not speak to anyone from the family without my presence," Augustus instructed. "Second, if approached by journalists, do not give interviews. Do not make statements. Third, live your lives with dignity and discretion. Do not flaunt. Do not make a fuss. Show the world that you are not opportunists but legitimate heirs who respect Henry's memory." "We can do that," Mary said firmly. "We have always lived with dignity, even in poverty. Money will not change our character." Augustus smiled. "That's exactly why Henry chose well when he loved you, Mrs. Mary. And that's why I'm sure Clarice will know how to handle her inheritance wisely." When Augustus finally said goodbye, it was already night. He left several contact cards, emergency numbers, and the promise that he would return in a few days to continue helping with the practical aspects of financial management. After he left, Clarice and Mary sat on the sofa in silence, processing everything that had happened. "It was the longest day of my life," Clarice finally said. "Mine too," Mary agreed. "But it was also the day when many old wounds began to heal." Clarice took off the necklace and placed it in her mother's hands. "He loved you, Mum. The letter makes that very clear, and I'm so sorry you didn't get the chance to be together." Mary caressed the necklace with delicate fingers. "I'm sorry too. But you know what, daughter? Maybe things happened the way they were meant to happen. If we had stayed together, I would never know if he loved me for me or out of obligation. I would always doubt if he had stayed just because of the pregnancy. This way, even with all the pain, I know the love was real, and I have you, who is the best of both of us." They hugged, and at that moment, in the simple house they would soon leave but which would forever hold their most precious memories, they felt a peace they had not known for a long time. It wasn't the perfect fairy tale ending, but it was real, it was theirs, and it was the beginning of something new. 3 months passed since that transformative day at the bank. Autumn had arrived in London, bringing milder temperatures and frequently cloudy skies, but for Clarice and Mary, each day seemed brighter than the last. They had moved into a spacious apartment in the Islington neighbourhood, a middle-class area with good infrastructure and easy access to hospitals and shops. It wasn't a mansion in Kensington, it wasn't unnecessary ostentation, but it was comfortable, safe, and had 3 bedrooms, which meant each had her own space, plus a guest room for when they wanted to receive visitors. Mary had stopped working as promised and was receiving regular medical follow-ups. The private cardiologists had adjusted her medication, and she was responding well to the treatment. The lines of constant worry on her face had begun to soften, replaced by a more serene expression. She spent her days tending a small garden on the apartment's balcony, reading books she had never had time for, and gradually discovering who Mary Mendez was beyond mother and worker. Clarice had also made changes in her life, but gradually, as Augustus had advised. She continued working for another month after receiving the inheritance, wanting to make a dignified transition and give her employers advance notice. When she finally left, it was with letters of recommendation and the sincere gratitude of people who had learned to respect her over the years. Now she was enrolled in a postgraduate course in financial management. Augustus had suggested that she invest in education, that she learn to manage not only her own fortune, but also to qualify herself to perhaps in the future help other people in similar situations. The idea had resonated deeply with Clarice. She didn't want to be just a passive heiress, but someone who made a difference. The bank had fulfilled all its promises. Robert had been dismissed, and according to Ferdinand, Clarice's premium manager, he was having great difficulty finding a new job, as the story of how he had treated a client had circulated discreetly in financial circles. Clarice did not take pleasure in his suffering, but there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that actions had consequences. The training program on prejudice and discrimination had been implemented in all bank branches, and Beatrice, the regional manager, had even asked Clarice's permission to use her story, without revealing names, as a case study in the training. Clarice had agreed, hoping that her experience could prevent others from going through the same thing. The compensation of £500,000 had been deposited as agreed. Clarice had used part of it to settle all debts incurred during the legal process, to gift her mother with some items she had always dreamed of having, and to create a small charity fund that helped single mothers in vulnerable situations pay for legal services. It was her way of transforming pain into purpose. As for the Thompson family, things had been more complicated. As Augustus had predicted, there were attempts at contact. First came the lawyers with settlement proposals, offering smaller sums in exchange for Clarice publicly renouncing her status as heir and the Thompson surname. Clarice categorically refused, advised by Augustus. She was not interested in additional money, and she certainly wasn't going to deny her own identity to comfort people who had treated her as a fraud. Then came the more personal attempts. The widow Marianne had appeared at their apartment one afternoon, unannounced. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, impeccably styled. Blonde hair, wearing designer clothes and exuding expensive perfume. But in her eyes there was something Clarice didn't expect. It wasn't anger, it was weariness. Mary had answered the door, and after a moment of tension where the two women stared at each other, had invited Marianne in. Clarice came down from her room and found the two sitting in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. "I didn't come to fight," Marianne had said, her first words. "Nor did I come to try to convince you to give up the inheritance. I came because I needed to. See with my own eyes the woman Henry truly loved, and the daughter he had with her." What followed was a long and painful conversation. Marianne confessed that she had always known her marriage to Henry was a sham, that both had agreed to live that lie for practical, family and social reasons. She herself had her own past love that she had had to abandon. When Henry fell ill and began to talk about Mary and about a daughter he had just discovered, Marianne wasn't jealous. She was sad for the life they had both wasted in a loveless marriage. "I tried to prevent the paternity recognition," Marianne admitted, "because Henry's family terribly pressured me. His parents, his siblings, all thought it was a scam, that you were taking advantage of a dying man. But deep down, I think I knew the truth." She looked directly at Clarice. "You have his eyes, and that crooked smile. There's no denying you're his daughter." The meeting ended surprisingly amicably. Marianne did not propose friendship, did not try to insert herself into their lives, but established a truce. She promised there would be no more attempts to reverse the paternity recognition, no more legal harassment or pressures. In return, she only asked that Clarice be discreet about the inheritance, that she not give interviews exposing the family, that she allow the Thompson name to maintain some dignity. Clarice agreed. She had no interest in public exposure anyway. Her revenge, if one could call it that, was simply to live well, to prove that she was worthy of the inheritance not by the clothes she wore or the surname she carried, but by the character her mother had taught her. Henry's parents never made contact, and Clarice was perfectly comfortable with that. She felt no need to be accepted by people who had rejected her before even knowing her. She had her mother. She had Augustus, who had become an almost paternal figure in her life, and she had some true friends who remained by her side even when they found out about her inheritance. Augustus visited them regularly, always bringing financial advice, but also, increasingly, simply coming for dinner, to chat, to share stories about Henry that helped Clarice get to know the father she never had. He told about the pranks they pulled in college, about the dreams Henry had when he was young, about how funny and intelligent he was, and yes, also cowardly in some aspects, but fundamentally good. On that particular autumn afternoon, 3 months after the day at the bank, Clarice was sitting on the apartment balcony, studying for an exam for her postgraduate course. Mary was beside her, knitting a scarf, something she had recently started as a hobby. The white gold necklace, the one that had belonged to Grandmother Helen, shone against the simple blouse Clarice was wearing. She wore it every day as promised, a constant reminder of her roots, both humble and noble. Clarice's phone rang. It was Ferdinand, her premium manager at the bank. "Good afternoon, Miss Clarice," he said with his usual courtesy. "I'm calling to confirm that this month's earnings have been deposited as expected, and also to inform you about an investment opportunity that might be of interest to you." They talked for a few minutes about numbers, percentages, projections. Clarice asked intelligent questions, a result of her postgraduate studies and hours of counseling with Augustus. She was no longer the frightened and lost young woman who had entered the bank 3 months ago. She was becoming a woman who understood finance, who made informed decisions, who grew in confidence day by day. After she hung up, she looked at her mother. "You know, Mum," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes it still feels like a dream. Everything that happened, the discovery about my father, the legal battle, that horrible day at the bank, the money, everything." Mary stopped knitting and looked at her daughter. "And do you regret having pursued this, of having opened that shoebox and discovered the letters?" Clarice thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "because even with all the pain, with all the difficulty, now I know who I am completely. I know where I came from, I have a name, a story, and I have you, who has always been the greatest inheritance I could have received, with or without money." Mary smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, daughter. I know he would." That night, Clarice had a dream. She dreamed she was in an immense and beautiful garden, full of flowers she had never seen before. She walked along the stone paths when she saw a man with his back to her observing a lake in the center of the garden. She knew, in the way one knows things in dreams, that it was her father. She approached, her heart beating fast. When she got close enough, he turned around. He really had the same eyes as her, the same crooked smile. He extended his arms and she ran into them, feeling an embrace that was at once a longing for something she never had, and deep comfort. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." "I know," she replied in the dream. "I read your letter. I understand." "You'll be all right," he said, stepping back a little to look at her face. "You and your mother will be all right. You are stronger than you imagine." When Clarice woke up, there were tears on her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of acceptance, of closure, of peace. Her father would never return, could never undo the absence or recover the lost years. But somehow, through his last attempt to correct his flaws, through the material and emotional inheritance he left, he had given her something valuable, the certainty that she had been loved. The following week, Clarice made an important decision. She sought out Augustus and proposed that they create a foundation together to help unrecognized children prove their paternity and claim their rights. She would invest part of her inheritance. Augustus would contribute his legal expertise, and together they would offer free legal support to people in situations similar to hers. Augustus embraced the idea with enthusiasm. "Henry would love this," he said, moved, "transforming your pain into something that helps others. It's perfect." The foundation was established 3 months later, named the Henry and Mary Foundation, honoring both the father, who belatedly recognized his daughter, and the mother who raised that daughter with love and sacrifice. On the inauguration day, lawyers, judges, social workers, and, most importantly, several people who had already been helped by the foundation in its first months of operation attended. Clarice gave a short speech, nervous but determined. She spoke about her journey, about how she had almost given up several times, about the day at the bank when she had been treated like a criminal. She spoke about the importance of fighting for one's rights, but also about how no one should have to fight alone. "Every child deserves to know who they are," she said, her firm voice echoing in the hall. "They deserve to have access to their own name, their own story, and no child should be judged by the circumstances of their birth or their mother's financial situation. This foundation exists to ensure that all children who find themselves in the situation I was in have the necessary support to claim their identity." The audience gave a standing ovation. Mary, sitting in the front row, wearing a new, elegant but not ostentatious dress, cried with pride. Augustus, beside her, had a huge smile on his face. After the event, while talking with some of the people the foundation was helping, Clarice realized something fundamental. The true inheritance her father had left her was not the millions in the bank account. It was the opportunity to make a difference, to transform a story of pain and absence into something that brought justice and dignity to others. That night, back in the apartment, Clarice stood on the balcony looking at the city lights. She wore Grandmother Helen's necklace, as always. In her hand she held the letter her father had written, already read so many times that she knew every word by heart. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for loving me the way you could. Thank you for giving me not just financial security, but purpose. I promise to honor your memory, not with ostentation or arrogance, but with work, dignity, and compassion." The night breeze moved her hair, and for a moment, Clarice felt as if it were a response, an approval coming from somewhere beyond her understanding. She smiled, turned, and went back inside, where her mother awaited her with hot tea and the promise of a quiet evening discussing plans for the foundation. Life wasn't perfect. There were still difficult days, still moments when her father's absence weighed heavily, still emotional scars that took time to heal. But there was also joy, hope, purpose. There was the certainty that despite all obstacles, all the pain, all the injustice, truth had prevailed. Dignity had prevailed. And in the end, that terrible day at the bank, when she had been humiliated and almost expelled, had become the catalyst for something greater. It had become the story she would tell the people she helped through the foundation as an example that no matter how powerful prejudice is, how deep discrimination runs, truth and perseverance always find a way. Clarice Miller Taylor was no longer just the unrecognized daughter of a wealthy businessman. She was no longer just the poor girl from the East Side. She was all those things and more. She was a dedicated student, a loving daughter, an emerging philanthropist, a fighter for justice. She was, above all, herself, complete and whole. And as she prepared for sleep that night, with her mother sleeping peacefully in the next room, and grandmother Eleanor's necklace carefully stored in her jewelry box, Clarice finally allowed herself to feel something she had avoided for so long. Peace. Peace with her past, confidence in her present, and hope in her future. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every tear, every moment of doubt, every instant of humiliation, because in the end she had not only found her financial inheritance, she had found herself. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Clarice and Maria has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that human dignity is not measured by expensive clothes or bank accounts, but by character and the courage to fight for our rights. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Your interaction helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages of hope. Every day we bring unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit and the importance of treating each other with respect and compassion. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a situation of prejudice? How did you deal with it? We would love to hear your story. Until the next time, and always remember, your origin does not determine your destiny, but your choices do.